Broadcasting from Restream. Haven't used it in a few weeks. Hold on, I got to get my glove on. This is the Liberty Moving podcast with Jim Ostrowski from Buffalo, New York. I like to do it outside in the cold because I'm a bit of a sadist, a masochist, whatever. No, I just feel like sitting on my butt, I have no energy, but when I'm walking, I have a lot more energy. But easier said than done because my hands are a little cold because of the setup of typing in the password and everything. But I just wanted to talk today, not too long probably, about I did a social media post last night, which I completed. I woke up at about 3 a.m. I realized I missed a lot of stuff that I needed to say, and I finished it up at about 3 a.m. And I really think it's kind of like a summary of everything I've learned in 50 years in politics, and really more anti-politics than politics. And I just want to talk about that today. So I tried to just sum up, where the liberty movement stands with just a few simple propositions. And I think all of these propositions, by the way, are matters of empirical fact. Some of them you could say are sort of logical deductions, but most of them are just like statements of empirical fact, or things that are so obvious that I don't really need to prove them. Now, there's a couple things in there that are a bit opinionated, and I can go into those as well. But and hopefully this all leads someplace. So the first proposition that I think you need to know if you're a supporter of the liberty movement, or even if you're not, but particularly if you are, voting has not increased liberty since 1800. Voting has not increased liberty since the year 1800 when Jefferson beat Adams. I talk about this a lot, but I think it's true. And without getting into all the reasons why that's true, I think that's a pretty formidable objection when anybody urges you, to engage in some sort of political activity. Sorry, it gets super cold out here, and I'm just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic so I can. Sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. So it's going to happen in the cold, in the winter of Buffalo. But I think it sort of shifts the burden of proof. I can and I have explained why this is true. But leaving that aside, the fact that it is true really kind of shifts the burden of proof on anybody advocating political action. So, second proposition here, and forgive me for, I normally don't have notes on the walking podcast, but let's talk about not voting. We talked about voting. What about not voting? Because not voting is, it's a lot of people advocate not voting. You don't vote, it only encourages them. And if we, by voting, you're manifesting your consent to the regime. That's not true. I've covered that in prior walking podcasts. It's not true. But leave all that aside. And I'm not telling anybody they should vote. Don't get me wrong here. I'm making a series of I'm asserting a series of propositions about political strategy. We're not talking about policy here today at all. I've covered that in all my other books. Talk about policy some other time. We're talking about political strategy and tactics. So if your strategy is, well, don't vote, well, that's never worked. That's never increased liberty, to the best of my knowledge. I can't even conjure up a possible example of where not voting has done anything. They don't care. Like the political class Like, I'll just give you a quick example, and then we'll move on to the list. Sorry about that. In primary elections, the machine tends to vote. And that's why the machine usually wins primary elections, and either the Democratic Party or Republican Party. So they don't care. They prefer that you didn't vote, in all honesty. Unless you're a tool of the machine or part of the machine. You know, some people vote for a living. This is an old joke. Some people work for a living. Some people vote for a living. The people who vote for a living, they always vote. Don't worry about it. So the people in the liberty movement, generally speaking, do not vote for a living. They're working for a living, and so the powers that be don't care if you vote or not. They don't want you to vote. So this notion that not voting is some sort of strategy, that's just plain silly. Okay, let's talk about the Republican Party. And again, I've written a book about this, Progressivism, a primer. There's a lot of reasons why the Republican Party is a fraud. Just proved it yesterday by signing on to another budget extension that accomplished nothing and it dealt with no issues that Republicans care about. The Republican Party has not repealed. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of dates in this social media post. It's on Twitter and Facebook if you want to read the whole thing. I tried to put it on LinkedIn or whatever, but it exceeded their time. I tried to put it on TikTok, but they have a text limit. Thank God for Facebook and Twitter. So, the progressive era starts in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, income tax, and then a year later, the war on drugs. Since 1913, in other words, since the beginning of progressive time, the Republican Party has not repealed a single progressive program. Let me adjust that camera a little bit. So, obviously, the Republican Party is a fraud and a hoax and a sham and a scam. What do we got next? Okay, now I do admit I have been part of that libertarian faction that is, let's say, for want of a better word, philo Trump. In other words, sympathetic to the Trump movement, understanding he's a flawed candidate and has a lot of non-libertarian policy views. But all we're saying is, you know, when you look at the George Bush II party, I think it's pretty easy to defend the proposition that Trump was better. So I'm not exactly a never Trumper, Trump basher, blah, blah, blah. I've always wanted to move him in a libertarian direction. She doesn't seem to want to go, but we'll see what happens this year. We'll see if his vice presidential candidate is libertarian oriented. I'm not counting on it. So Trump, if you're putting your hope in Trump, now you may like Trump for other reasons, but if you think Trump is going to help the liberty movement, so he made government bigger the first time, and he's probably going to make government bigger the second time. And the first time he added $7 trillion to the debt and 70,000 civilian government employees. I couldn't find a stat for the military, but so I'm not going to comment on that. And he added a new agency, Space Force. Let's talk. So Trumpism isn't going to do it. Let's talk about conservatism. And again, these are just factoids that summarize that. This is like this is tape it to the refrigerator type stuff. I admit that. But all of these propositions have a whole series of reasoning and history and theory behind them. It's just that they kind of sum up the point. And again, they shift the burden of proof to anybody. Now we're going to talk about conservatism. Anybody who thinks conservatism is going to lead you to the promised land, so they now have the burden of proving that, as opposed to me having to prove that it won't. And of course, most people think that I have to prove that because they think it's self-evident that conservatism is good. But Conservatism hasn't conserved anything since 1964 other than left progressive big government. That's that phrase is not original to me. I picked it up. I don't know who originated. If I did, I'd cite them. But that phrase is out there. It's not original, but it's true. They haven't conserved a fucking thing. Let's talk about the right wing generally. The right wing generally. The problem with the right is, and it's kind of it's one of my theories of history, I suppose. As I've observed history, since the French Revolution, the problem with the right is always a react. Let me read what I have here exactly. The right is always is a reaction to the left, as opposed to a coherent and unifying idea, and that's why it almost always loses. So whatever the right wing is, and that's the part of the problem. Nobody really knows what it is. The right wing it tends to lose, and therefore that's not going to help. Let's talk about the next failed idea, and that is yield constitution. And again, I have readjust the camera a little bit. I have written about the Constitution. It's one of our biggest fallacies. I have written about it many times. I've done podcasts about it many times. I am a constitutional lawyer, so I think I know a little bit about the subject. But I'm not going to go into if you want the argument about the fallacy of constitutionalism, I would go to progressivism a primer. But I'm just gonna read the one sentence proposition here. The Constitution failed and can never work. And again, since the government of the United States has been getting bigger, ever since the Constitution was ratified, was it 1789? It's like, who cares? 1788, 1789, I can't remember. By the way, the ratification of the Constitution illegally seceded from the Articles of Confederation. It's just pretty fucking funny because Lincoln started a war over an alleged violation of the Constitution when the Southern states seceded. So, Constitution, fail vote. Let's talk about limited government. We want limited government. Now, again, this is just the summary of an argument, but it's a summary of an argument that's, again, these are all sort of empirically true, obviously true in common sense, or they're logically true. This is one of these things that's both empirically true and logically true. Limited government is a contradiction in terms and can never exist. The parasite of government tends to grow constantly until it is so large that it destroys the host society upon which it preys. And again, there's never been, I'm not going to attempt to prove this now, but hold on a second, sorry. I got to get my camera back here. Oh, there I am. There's your podcaster. Disappeared for a second. So why is limited government a contradiction of terms? Because government is the final arbiter of its own power, and therefore it's not limited. The founders tried to limit it, by the way, unsuccessfully, with two mechanisms, and I've written about this extensively: juries and the right to bear arms. And guess what? The government has passed thousands of laws against the right to bear arms. They've infringed it. And they basically made grand juries useless, and they've made trial juries next to useless too. So the two mechanisms that the founders used to actually make government limited failed. So I think that case is clear. And then there hasn't been. There's no example of a limited government. In other words, there's no this notion of the night watchman state. We're going to have police, courts, resolve disputes, and protect from invasion. Well, here's the thing. There's no such example. I don't, there's no such example in human history as that type of limited government. Government grows all the time, blah 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 blah. So that's just true. So let's talk about the, not going in any particular logical order here, kind of the order I thought about it when I was drafting the post. Let's talk about the alt right, because the alt right, which I study very closely, because they're competing with libertarianism. They'd be the first ones to tell you they bash libertarianism all the time. So the alt right comes along, and I could go on at length at this. I'm trying to summarize it. So the alt right came along because of the obvious failure of conservatism, particularly the neoconservative tendency. But they've had 5 or 6 years on the stage to reveal themselves, and they have, and they're not going to provide an alternative way to increase liberty. I mean, so there's a few problems with them. They focus on identifying certain racial, ethnic, and religious groups that are allegedly hostile, to the interests of the country, and that's just, to me, that's not happening. We all to paraphrase Rodney King, we do all have to get along. I mean, nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's rebuilding concentration camps. Nobody's going to, commit genocide. So basically, we all have to get along. My particular organization, libertymovement.org, as small as it is, does, welcomes all members from any race, ethnicity, or religious group. Our enemy is not other people who don't look like us. It's the government, and I've made that point repeatedly. And, I started out, just another quick point. First of all, they're not committed to liberty anyway. So even if you liked some of their critique of American society, I think is accurate. But when you look at their solutions, like, they don't have any. They're not in favor of individual liberty across the board. So they're not going to lead us to the promised land. But just one quick point on the alt right. So it's not, my objection is not that the people who run my life don't look like me. I don't want people who look like me running my life either. And I think that's my core difference with the alt right. I started out in politics in Irish Democratic South Buffalo, fighting the Irish machine. I'm half Irish, so those are my people. I'm related to some of these people. So I didn't want Irish Catholics telling me what to do, So just the fact that it's not about somebody doesn't look like you. It's the government is the problem, and I think properly understood people who are from different walks of life should be able to understand that it's the government is the problem, and that in a free society we could all get along. So that's the alt right. So much for them. Just a sort of an analytical point here. The power of government is not based on force or consent, but acquiescence, and that's just, obviously that's not a failed movement, but it's a if you don't understand the nature of government power, you can't really formulate a strategy to defeat that power. So that's just true. We don't consent to the government, and although the government does use massive quantities of force, that's not its primary basis of perceived legitimacy. as Rothbard pointed out, they use massive amounts of propaganda. Even totalitarian states use massive amounts of propaganda. So it's not all force. In fact, I think it's probably mostly not force. It's acquiescence. And so I have a phrase there. It's like, I don't withdraw my consent. I withdraw my acquiescence of this regime. Talk about the Libertarian Party, and not very long. It's my own group. I'm in it now. I've been in and out for a while. I was a Republican for quite some time, but that turned out to be a colossal failure. The way they treated, I decided to get out with the way they treated Ron Paul, basically. What can I say? That just speaks for itself. So the Libertarian Party's been stuck at 1% since 1980. I think that's enough said on that. So gotta turn my notes around here. Excuse me, pardon me. Again, I normally don't do notes, so you get this sort of wild stream of consciousness usually in the walking podcast. There's a hawk up there. Hope it's not going after me. So now let's talk about. You would think that we'd be able to convince people that these things are true, and therefore people would stop doing things that aren't going to work, or that haven't worked, or obviously not going to work. But there is a thing called the controlled opposition. And I've looked around for some definitive definition of it, and I haven't found one, but I think we all kind of know what it means. So let me just quote from my text here. There is a controlled opposition that makes a huge amount of money and gains a huge amount of power by convincing the masses that these obvious facts are not true, and or by ignoring these obvious facts and using sophisticated propaganda techniques to convince people to continue to try strategies and tactics that have failed many, many times for many, many decades, and which are doomed to fail by their very nature. So I think if you're wondering, like, gee, Jim, I mean, you make a lot of sense, but how come nobody seems to be catching on to these things? Well, there's this controlled opposition, and they have a vested interest in bamboozling people and into believing that, voting for some candidate is going to work, or vote harder, got to get more people registered. Some of the gun owners aren't registered. This factoid going around about if all the gun owners registered, I don't even know what you're talking about. Most of the gun owners are registered. It's just some of them vote Democratic, apparently. And there's not enough not registered to make a difference. That's my opinion. So try to wrap up here. I'm getting to Shoshone Park. And hurdles just beyond that. It's the end of my podcast because I don't do it on the street. There is only one thing left to try, and it will work if tried. It will even improve your own life, even if others do not join in. So what do I mean by that? So let's say we get enough people moving away from big government areas into smaller government areas, that will starve the beast tremendously. And these governments will have a lot less power. Hopefully they'll start to, frankly, collapse and ultimately have to face the fact that we need more freedom. So that's the theory. I think that theory is sound. However, even if nobody else does it, if you move to a freer state, you're still benefiting your own life. I've got some people using my ramp here, so I'm going to take a little detour down the hill. So, hold on, a little unexpected interruption. And that, what is that thing I'm talking about? It's called direct citizen action, which is I've talked about in my books extensively. It's basically things you can do today to move your own life and the country towards liberty. And I have written 5 books about it. They're all on Amazon. Progressivism, Direct Citizen Action, obviously. Progressivism, a primer. The Second Amendment Works. And there's a couple more books that I actually wrote a little short book about how to revive the liberty movement. And that has a lot of ideas in it too. And if you're interested in direct action, if you're convinced that all these other avenues that we're told to participate in are fail boats and doomed to fail, which they are, as I've concluded after doing this for 50 years, then if you're interested in direct action, for example, voting with your feet or pulling your kids out of government school or voting with your health, the big thing there that I'm pushing is walking 7,500 steps a day. That would, and this is all based on solid stats, estimates of stats, but it's based on solid research on the subject. You can cut we can cut the all-cause mortality rate in half, and obviously also reduce illness, disease, and obviously also reduce healthcare costs, which is, I think, was it 17% of GDP? I can't remember. Is it? I can't remember the numbers. I had the numbers in my head a few weeks ago when I was talking about this extensively. So you can go to libertymovement.org and then click on direct action if you're interested. And if you want more information, I'm easy to find. I'm on Twitter, Facebook. My contact info is on the website. I am accepting speaking engagements if your group wants to hear more instead of the same old crap that's going to fail. I've already proven that all this other stuff is a big fail boat. That's basically it. I mean, if you don't want to do direct action, which will work, and I think, again, the fact that direct action works is both empirically true and logically true. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time proving that. And again, although it's an efficient form of joint action, it's even if you're the only one doing it. In other words, if you're doing 7,500 steps a day, you're improving your health, even if everybody else next door keeps sitting on the couch eating donuts. So that's a critical point to understand, because these other methods all require sort of this long shot, thread the needle, draw an inside straight. Trump wins Michigan by 12,000 votes because Hillary didn't campaign there at the last minute. All these other things really require you to exert tremendous effort without any expectation at all that your own personal life is going to be improved. And that's the big distinction with direct action. So I end the post: the clock is ticking, the state is growing, and your liberty is shrinking. So what can I say, folks? I'm the most experienced political operative in the liberty movement. I've been doing this since I was a kid. I've been doing this for longer than 50 years. I've been doing this for more than 50 years, and I'm only 66. I've studied it all. I've done it all. None of it works. It's all bullshit. There's a phrase, peeling the onion, which I tried to find the origin of it last night, but I couldn't find it. But I think you all know what it means. And look, I peeled the onion, and I'm down to it. And this is what it is. I've taken no prisoners today, and this is what I'm going to be talking about for as long as I draw a breath or have the money to put gas in my tank and keep the electricity flowing so I can charge my iPhone. So from Buffalo, New York, it's the Liberty Moving podcast with Jim Ostrowski. Please share this because nobody else is doing this work, as far as I know, to the extent I am anyway. Talk to you later, everybody.